So what I find amazing about the creative process and the journey in general is how distinctly different where you start and where you finish, and finish being kind of a loose term because you're never done. But where beginnings and even the current state of things over time could seem so dissimilar. And Warframe illustrates that perfectly when you look at Digital Extremes starting as a studio working with Epic Mega Games to make pinball games, and yet somehow evolved over 2 decades into a studio that makes a game about space ninjas running around in a multiplayer online experience that is nothing like where they began. So no, I really truly believe that there's a lot to be said about doing the work and letting things catch up. We often talk about how much things have changed in our lifespans when it comes to the technology around gaming and animation. Gaming specifically, it was unlikely to see a game like Warframe coming into existence in 1993 as the idea of us talking about flying cars when watching movies like Back to the Future. It just didn't seem likely that something could be so beautifully made and so crisp in terms of the action and graphics. So to even think that the people who were making a game and just loved making games could even imagine that possible beyond just a dream. But yet, that's what life is. It's where you begin and where you end. The gap between what can change is so immense that you can't make predictions based off of that. You just have to do the work and work with what you have. And then as opportunity provides, whether it be technology, a more receptive society, whatever it is that it takes to make your message, your vision palatable, it begins with just doing the work and getting there through time.
Well, that's part of the beauty of the creative journey, is the beauty and the challenge of it is all those little elements that get you to the point of what it is, your dream, that vision you're going after. They're all found within the building blocks prior to that. Even with James Schmalz, the CEO of Digital Extremes, he created a self-published sci-fi game that he's starting to add little elements of character customization and things like that. Well before has become such a standard feature in so many video games, and how that little element we're seeing Warframe, but how much of Warframe is found within all of the previous games that they developed.
Well, absolutely. And that's the thing is, when we talk about the creative process, Austin Kleon, a writer that I highly recommend, writes books like Steal Like an Artist and Show Your Work and Keep Going are his current titles. But with Steal Like an Artist, he talks about finding, a creative genealogy, being inspired by what's before you. Now, while that's great in understanding where you can be inspired to make your work, I think you also have to acknowledge the creative genealogy of what you actually make yourself. Starting with the pinball games, the relationship as that transitioned with Epic Mega Games into the late 90s, early 2000s with Unreal Tournament, and how that really probably brokered a lot of the vision of what Warframe became. When it became Dark Sector and this idea of making something that was both built around a world and a vision that Schmalz had developed with his team towards space ninjas and running around this open environment doing the things they did before it was really even able to properly be executed. I mean, we're talking about when Dark Sector was being a brainchild type game. Other MMOs, for those who don't know, massively multiplayer online games that included City of Heroes in that timeline in 2004, World of Warcraft. So in that same time frame, we look at what those games look like in that time, and we look at what Warframe actually was when it released in 2013. And that vision probably was not even possibly able to be executed with the crispness that they'd envisioned at that time. So sometimes you're ahead of your own dreams and own ideas. And I think that's one of the things we really see here with the creative process is running into walls and trying to break through before you can find the door in the dark. So when you're in that dark room fumbling for a handle, sometimes the handle you turn isn't the door you were looking for. And we see that with Dark Sector. Dark Sector was the dream that became Warframe. But before then, in pitching to these different publishers, the game that was made was not actually what was truly desired.
Yeah, Dark Sector is an interesting example of losing your way within the creative journey. Here was a studio, Digital Extremes, wanting so badly to see their vision come to fruition. And so they were going to publishers, they were going to developers, and what can we do to get this game created? And what happened is, in order to get the game developed, they started compromising. Sometimes there's a place for compromise, other times there's not. And here, what started happening was that their original idea for Dark Sector, which is more of what Warframe is today, began changing, became more of that Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil type game, a little bit less sci-fi, a little bit more horror. It became wholly different than what they were going for because they were pushing hard to get it done, but what happened is they lost their way and weren't able to create the game they truly wanted to create, which then led them to the point of where the do or die moment where they wanted to create Warframe the way they envisioned it, and it meant they had to go solo for a period of time.
Well, what we see here, something we see too often in creative properties, is that you have a vision, and that when you have to seek that funding, that publisher, that they got the rare opportunity to take another bite at the apple, to take what Dark Sector was supposed to be and wasn't, and to go back and to make it happen with Warframe. But what this mirrors a lot to me, and what we don't talk about this with gaming as much, is what we see with film and TV, is where somebody has a script, a vision for what their characters are, or a book that gets turned and optioned into something is a very common version of this. And what happens is when other people put their creativity or their cost-cutting measures, or trying to get the right actor or certain things wedged in, that it becomes completely different than what was beloved in the beginning, whether it be as just an idea that was for the creator or what the fans themselves already wanted from them. And I think that's what gets interesting, is sometimes the people who have the money don't have the vision or the understanding of why it's good. And I think we see that with Dark Sector a bit, is somebody so badly wanting to bring their vision to life, but where the dollars and what was popular at the time drove a lot more than understanding of what this game could be. And that sometimes you don't need 5 to 6 other titles in that same space to influence why you make something. Sometimes being the one that does it right is good enough.
I think even to that point of what's interesting of how sometimes those developers who at that point they were the way to get a game out, but they didn't have the vision, and yet here they had a team that they were able to share that vision and leverage all that creativity to create something that, where it may have started with James Schmalz, could have never become truly what Warframe is without all of that input and all of that buy-in from their entire team to develop that game.
Well, right. And I think also Warframe is an incredibly great example of the differences from the time that Warframe came out in 2013 and now, where, as you mentioned previously, that Warframe and Digital Extremes by Truth was so beholden to the publishers, the money. But now as technology continues to grow, there's so much more that can be done as a creative independently, whether on a large scale like with Digital Extremes and Warframe, or as an independent doing it in your own office at home. It's that you have that ability to build that repetition and incremental trust that you put into yourself and those who work with you in a product. We see that with YouTubers and people creating great cinema and other things on a budget. That there are things now that you can do with a camera phone that you couldn't even do with an expensive budget 20 years ago when Digital Extremes came, 26 years ago now. So it's just amazing to see how opportunity comes from the growth in technology, and that in doing and putting the work in and butting their heads against what Dark Sector was supposed to be and versus what Warframe is now, they got to earn that trust by when put under a test. They weren't just new to it. As we talked about early on, that creative journey isn't something that happens overnight. There are very rarely such a thing as an overnight success. That is one of the myths of creativity, is that it just comes out of nowhere. But even if it could, why would you want creativity that comes out of that space? There is nothing earned. You talked about trust. What happens when you run into the adversity that we've seen with Digital Extremes and this child of creativity that Warframe is that it was born from successes and failures. That trust was established. Because if you have overnight success, we see so often people who can't maintain it, because when they hit that crucible and they're put under fire, they've done nothing to earn that success to be able to maintain it.
That's the interesting thing about this, is that true success, long-lasting success, is built on failures. And that's the whole dichotomy that's so hard, I think, for us to grasp, is failure is so often perceived as a bad thing, and yet how challenging it is to rewire our brains to think, yes, I failed. What can I learn? How do I move forward and grow?
All right, and you mentioned failure, and I think it's how we engage with failure. There are times where failure can inform a lot of things, good and bad, and choices that need to be made. Failure is not meant to be the thing that paralyzes you. The fear of it keeps you from starting. The constant doing it makes you feel that you're not worthy of the thing you're trying to do. But none of that matters. What matters is actually doing it and learning from those missteps, learning from the successes, but knowing that failure will teach you multiple times more than any success can. And when you do that both as an individual and as a collaborative team like Digital Extremes did with Warframe, you're battle tested, you're ready, you've earned it. You also know that when there's such things as imposter syndrome and whether you are good enough, that you've shown that you are. It doesn't even matter anymore because you look at the people around you, know that we've done it and we're going to keep doing it and we'll keep learning and succeeding and making efforts based off of what we've learned from those failures. And that is why we will succeed. Failure is why you succeed, not the thing that keeps you from succeeding.
And that really is the creative journey. It's showing up each day. It's moving forward to that vision, that end goal. It's getting up when you fall down. It's celebrating in the wins. It's picking up teammates along the way, grabbing mentors along the way, and you're just going after the goal each and every day.
Well, and that's the thing with the sustainability of such a thing is if you're a creative and you're not okay with failing, you need to learn to be okay with it or know that you have to step away. Yeah. Because it's a truly masochistic experience. It's knowing that you're going to walk in and even if you make something that is critically acclaimed, that the majority of people will either not get it, hate it, or any number of things that were not as designed, that you're making something for a small subset of an audience, no matter how great you are, and that people aren't going to like it, and that you can take that seriously, or you can adapt and listen to the people who actually have things to say that actually impact growth, and let the rest fall on deaf ears because it doesn't matter. You're doing something that most people aren't. So one thing to realize about the creative journey, whether it be talking about Warframe or anyone else, is it doesn't happen overnight. It's not done alone. And the things that you learn from your failures are more valuable than any success will bring. And to be able to embrace that is the beauty of when that success happens. It allows you to enjoy that journey because the journey is not just about succeeding and making these checklist items come true. It's about truly building something that you can look back on while doing it and after the fact and feel that pride and knowing that you took a step further than most will ever take in actually putting yourself out there, but also doing something that had worth that was beyond just your own scope.
And that's really where the value is in the creative journey. It's the journey itself. The reward, the goal you're after, that's your compass. That's where you're headed. But where the real value is in a creative journey is in going through those steps, going through each element of that creative journey, the failures, the successes, the gaining those followers, the leveraging of those followers. But it's truly being able to learn the lessons that you're going to learn only by doing the work, putting it out there, and moving forward.
Well, and that's the whole point, moving forward. So right now, when you're sitting there wondering, how do you make this thing in your head come true?
When's my time?
Right. Moving forward is the key. Take those steps. If you can only make one step, take that step. You'll find that once you start going, you'll never want to stop. And whenever you stumble, you get up and keep moving forward. Fall forward. Never fall backward. Never give up. Be aware that this is not something that's just going to take a day. It's going to take a lifetime, and you'll be surprised with where you started and where you'll find yourself before you're done.